Hey everybody! I've been pretty excited to make this video here because I'm finally updating on the goldenberry grafted onto the ground cherry, which you might have seen when we were first grafting this and first talking about this concept in our ground cherry versus goldenberry video, and kind of the verdicts we were coming to in our climate, with the ground cherry being far superior in performance. Now, things have completely flipped since then, and in a very good way, because this was highly experimental. So by putting the goldenberry on the ground cherry rootstock, we were primarily trying to accomplish giving this plant additional heat resistance that it does not naturally have. So goldenberry, as opposed to ground cherry, does not perform well in our very hot summers, where we can see temperatures of 90 to 100 degrees for weeks in a row. And on top of that, we've had a lot of drought this summer too, which has put a lot of stress on the plants. Now, the ground cherry, on the other hand, particularly the native type, which you can see down here, we used as the rootstock here, and that union is looking great. Not a whole lot of incompatibility that I can tell, at least. But the native ground cherry rootstock performs a lot better in the summer here. It continues flowering and continues fruiting despite any hot weather or otherwise pretty terrible growing conditions. So the logic, of course, was that maybe, just maybe, whatever influence the root system of this plant can have on the goldenberry here could give it that same type of advantage and allow this plant to continue producing and doing well in the hot, hot summer. And what do you know? It seems like we actually accomplished that, at least. So our preliminary observations, after grafting this plant, we noticed right away it was incredibly vigorous. Now, the rootstock plant being the Physalis angulata, so cutleaf ground cherry, it's a very vigorous and very bushy plant. We had one that we just pulled up, put here in one of the rows, and it became huge and made hundreds and hundreds of, unfortunately, not too good tasting ground cherries. It's one of the worst tasting ground cherries I've ever had. However, as a rootstock, it seems to be excellent because it has given this plant a lot more vigor. And again, that heat resistance, you can see now the past couple weeks we've been hitting 100 degrees and we've been well above 90 all these days. And we are continuing to see flower buds all over here. We have flowers, we have fruit that are setting and holding and growing. You can see this plant is very happy. And I will say the growth is different too. These leaves are thicker, they're darker green. Again, the plant is faster growing. It seems like it uptakes nutrients better. And the leaves, especially some of the first ones when it was just growing, I mean, they were massive. These are huge leaves compared to the original plants. So far we could tell this plant, compared to the plants that we had in these rows on their own roots, is growing a lot healthier. The plants in these rows here had pale green leaves. Again, this has dark green leaves. It's taking up nutrients well. It's growing a whole lot faster. And again, this was just a scion taken from one of those plants that wasn't doing so good and put directly onto an already growing rootstock. We used a side veneer graft, and it took off after a couple weeks. It started growing. And here we are a couple months later, and we have this awesome plant here that's now loading up with fruit, which is really cool. And now next year, what I'm going to do is I'm going to repeat this experiment at a seedling stage, where I'm going to graft the goldenberry back onto the cutleaf ground cherry while they are both seedlings, and raise up several plants and compare them directly. So compare this graft combination directly to goldenberry on its own roots, so we have an even time frame. They're starting at the same time and they'll go through the same exact conditions together in the same soil, everything, and we'll have a direct comparison. However, our N=1 experiment here has proven very successful. This plant just singularly has done phenomenal. I'm really happy with the growth so far. I'm really happy that it's setting fruit and holding on to them despite this heat. And the berries are growing to a good size in there. The only thing I did notice is that insect resistance, unfortunately, is still a weakness of the goldenberry. So the ground cherry hardly gets touched by insects in my experience. However, the goldenberry here is very susceptible. Everything likes to eat this thing clearly. There's holes in all these leaves. We're always picking off little bugs from underneath here all the time. Everything wants to eat this plant. So the rootstock did not give it some magical resistance to insects, which, go figure. However, a healthier plant generally will be more insect resistant. So the idea is, as I continue to pick these bugs off, the idea is, as we continue to save seeds from each generation, hopefully selecting strains that'll be more adapted to this area for the goldenberry, and of course the cutleaf ground cherry we can grow whenever we need it for rootstock, or just find them wild really. They should all work pretty well. But I want to select strains of this that are particularly productive and maybe even, if possible, insect resistant in this climate here, so we can get a locally adapted goldenberry strain. And then from there, by grafting that locally adapted strain, we will have a superior plant that may actually have some commercial potential here in North Carolina. Maybe we won't get that far, but if I can at least improve on this plant and make it more growable for more people, that would be awesome, because I've heard a lot online about people struggling with these plants. The bugs always get to their fruit first. They don't do well in the hot summer. Those are really big issues in a lot of areas. So if we could fix most of that at least, we can make this plant a lot more viable in different climates. And I think, I don't know for sure, obviously this particular rootstock has done excellent and it's widely adapted. It could be used, I think, pretty much anywhere along the East Coast and maybe even going out a little bit west. But there are ground cherries native all over North America, and there might be local varieties that you could graft this onto, and maybe they'll be compatible enough where you can see some advantages to grafting this onto your native ground cherry, which I will show you an example here, because I was able to pot some up that I found outside. This is another native ground cherry, and you can see that little flower in there. But this is a different species than the cutleaf ground cherry. I think this is Physalis pubescens. I think it's some sort of like hairy leaf or fuzzy leaf ground cherry, something along those lines, and it's flowering at a really short height. But this is another ground cherry that does really well in our climate. So I may even save seeds from these and trial these as a rootstock for the goldenberry as well. So that gives us several possibilities. We can have a few plants grafted onto the pubescens, a few plants grafted onto the angulata, and then a few plants on their own roots. But again, this seems to give us some hope here that goldenberry can be improved upon. And of course, when we say goldenberry is still a ground cherry, and that's why these are compatible. They are very closely related. They all make those little husk fruits like tomatillos, but this one is particularly tasty. If anyone is wondering, I might have covered it before, but it does taste different grown here versus grown in tropical regions. It kind of has more of like a sweet tart taste, like the candy, where it's like a little chalky, but it's sweet and tart. Very tropical still, but just not as tropical and bright as the fruit that you would get at the grocery store, which are surprisingly good actually. But we're trying to get there. However, I think the fruit quality is good enough where my primary concerns are going to be insects and disease resistance, although insects have really been the bulk of that. And of course, heat resistance, which already seems promising just based on using that rootstock. And it's just amazing seeing all the flowers loaded up in here. I will say my only issue I've had with this rootstock combination is the growth has been very upright, very fast, and because it's been so vigorous, I don't know if it's just the goldenberry's not used to growing like this, but we've had a lot of branches at the bottom begin to snap once they get too tall. So we had a broken branch there, and there, and there. And granted, it's healing up fine and continuing along, but that is something we will pay attention to next year and see if that's just because of the way we've grafted this one, or if it happens no matter what, just being on that rootstock, in which case we will take measures to make sure everything is staked at least a little bit, and you could probably train these even better than just sticking a bamboo stick there. But I hope you guys find this little experiment interesting. I'm happy to report some success here. It took a few months, but honestly, that's still a really short amount of time in the grand scheme of things to conduct such an experiment. So maybe some of you can join me next year if you're interested in this particular fruit. Again, this is Physalis peruviana grafted onto Physalis angulata. And there is also a pubescens that is native here and all along the east too. But you can experiment. Again, it might be different where you're located, but see how goldenberry interacts with your native ground cherry. I'd be really interested to hear about other people doing this because as far as I know, no one else is. I couldn't find anything online about this, so here you go. Hope you guys enjoyed and see you next time.